All right, the next thing we have is payment methods setup. So I selected on this, and this is where you put in all of the different tenders for the PixelPoint system. So coming into this, the first thing we have here, we're on cash, and we've got Visa, MasterCard, and all these other ones as well. And on this, we have, first of all, the descriptions. Now, my recommendation is that leave the cash record as it is. The reason being is that there's a lot of stuff that's internally programmed into this to make sure that whatever the base currency is, that will be the cash record. So always leave that. Whatever your base currency is, no matter what part of the world, cash is cash, and whatever your local currency is, that's what this one record will represent. Any other currencies beyond that, any foreign currencies, then you can use any other record for that. But leave this first one as it is. Now, just to the right of that, we have is currency. If I have this checked, then that means that the system will recognize it is not any form of credit and will not make any assumptions based on that either. It's either credit or currency. That's basically what it comes down to. And so if you have this checked, then that means that this is a form of monetary paper, money of some kind. Coming down below that, we have exchange rate. Now, the exchange rate of 1, cash is cash for wherever I am. If I'm American or Canadian or Mexican or whatever happens to be, then whatever the local currency is, that's what this is, an exchange rate of 1. But if I have a foreign currency as well, for example, if I also accept sterling, okay, British pounds, then 1 British pound may be the equivalent of $1.50 of my base cash. So in which case, then I would put in 1.50 for the exchange rate, in which case 4 pound. All right, in which case then what the system will do is when it's tendering something off to a foreign currency, you'll see what it is with that exchange rate. Now, PixelPoint does not look to international exchange rates or what it currently is within the market or anything like that. You set it within here, and that's the way it is. So if it changes on a daily basis or something like that, then it's up to the establishment. If they really want to keep up with it that much, then they can change it in here on a daily basis. But we don't automate this process at all. All right, to the right of that, we have number of decimal places. Now, again, depending on the currency that you're working with, some of them have 0 decimal places. Some of them have 3 decimal places. So depending on what the currency happens to be. Anything North America and most parts of Europe, you'll be looking at 2 decimal places. Coming over to the right-hand side, we have minimum security required. I can apply a security level on a per method of payment basis. So on here, for example, I can set it so that my teenage staff can close a cash transaction, but they can't process a credit card. It needs manager authorization for that. So you can set up security levels on a per method of payment basis. Underneath that, percent employee tip surcharge, 3 equals 3%. Now, what this pertains to is charge tips. Now again, I don't want to get too deep into credit auth right now, but here's the way it works in reality, is that when I process a credit card transaction with the credit service, there's actually a surcharge. This is how the credit service makes its money. And they charge X number of percent for the amount of money that they process through. So if I have a $100 transaction and they charge 3%, for example, as a surcharge for processing that credit card transaction, then that means out of that $100 transaction, 30 cents will be deducted or 30 cents will be charged for them to process that $100 transaction. It's not great, but that's the way business works. And that's fine in itself. But the thing is, on that $100 transaction, I also have my $10 tip. Now, the $10 tip now increases that pay or that surcharge from 30 cents up to 3 cents. We'll say 33 cents. So basically 3 cents of that would be the 3% of the $10 would then be also charged on top of that to pay for the charged transaction. Now what you can do is within here, you can actually say, you know what, if I'm going to pay my surcharge for my revenue, you're going to pay your surcharge for your charge tip. And so what the system will do will then, it will then calculate out that the 3% when you apply the charge tip, that 3% will be deducted from that charge tip to pay for your surcharge for that charge transaction. It may seem kind of petty because, okay, well, that's what, 3 cents, for that charge transaction. Well, yeah, that's 3 cents for that one charge transaction. Multiply that by all of your staff every day, every transaction they do, or charge transaction they do. And over a period of time, that's a lot of money that you would be absorbing if you were not actually charging that surcharge for the charged tips to your employees. So the restaurant will pay its surcharge, but the employees getting their charged tips will also pay their surcharge, and this is where you program that in. This information will be reflected across within the employee cash out report and also be available for viewing within the tender balance screen when that comes up. Coming down below that, we have, actually let's go over to the left again, we have select, and in here we have all of our methods of authorization that can be applied within the system. Now PixelPoint will work with integrated credit authorization. It will also work with external credit card authorization as well. If it's an external system where I've got a little box, I've rented it from the bank, and I swipe my cards through there and it goes through the credit service and so on. Then when it comes to applying charge tips on the system, all you have to do is, as I had mentioned in a previous session, just over tender it. So if it's a $100 credit card transaction with a $10 tip, then in the PixelPoint system I would not have it set up for credit card authorization because that's done externally, but I would over tender it so that it would be $110 for the credit card transaction, and then the $10 would be reflected as change because it just basically treats it like cash, and it would be with the understanding when the reports generate out that $10 change on that credit card transaction would be the charge tip. But if you are using the integrated credit authorization, which most people do, then you can determine which one of these little check boxes you want to use on a per method of payment basis. Now the first one here is no authorization. Cash is cash, I'll take it. So there's no authorization required for that. The next one down here is member VIP authorization. Now if you select on this, what's going to happen is that this method of payment will actually look to the contents of the member database table within PixelPoint. And it will look for the member swipe card number or the member name or the member phone number, something like that, to retrieve the member record. And then there may be something in there identifying, well, it's a prepaid balance because there's a gift card, or this customer has, for example, a credit, a house credit, so they're allowed to charge to that account, and then we'll bill them and they can pay back later on, things like that. So anything of that nature reflecting within where you're applying a member to the transaction, or then that method of payment will look to that database based on that little checkbox. The next one down here is credit card authorization. If you check on this, then the transaction is going to look for a credit card swipe number and also the expiry date as well. And then from there it will branch out to the credit card verification system to look for further authorization. The next one down is front desk authorization. So within this may be for things like a room charge, if I program in a method of payment called room charge, in which case then it will interface with a PMS or property management system. It'll look for a folio number, in this case, to match that up to see if you can charge it across to their room. The next thing we have here is debit cards. So within this, once again, it'll look for the swipe number, but also a PIN number in this case. The next one down is custom. If there's any form of custom authorization that may be required for any method of payment anywhere in the world, then you can actually program that into the system and use credit or a custom authorization, in which case then it will use whatever criteria is defined for that. The next one down is gift card third party. Now do not confuse this with the integrated gift card system within PixelPoint. That one looks to the member record. This one looks to an external third-party system, for example, the Mercury gift card system. This is an external third-party software, and if that is the case, this will then interface with that to look externally for that authorization. And then also for just general external authorizations for anything beyond the Mercury gift card system or anything beyond whatever might be customized for any form of authorization, there's also external authorization as well. You select on this and it will look externally for any form of authorization, and more often than not you would have to manually punch in an approval number for that before it processes through. In most cases what you're going to use is no authorization, member, and credit card in most cases. If they use debit card would be in there as well, and if you're interfacing with anything pertaining to motels and hotels, then there may be use for front desk. So those are the most common ones there. Coming over to the right-hand side, we have payment options. First thing here, sale auth, no pre-auth. By now you should know what this is. This means that if I select this method of payment, any form of charge tipping will not be required for it. So you can actually have, for example, two visas programmed into the system, one that requires tipping, one that does not. for example. And you could have one set up with this checked and the other set up with it unchecked. The next thing down is disable cash drawer from opening. So if I select on this method of payment, then do I want the cash drawer to open or not? If you're familiar with cash drawers, most cash drawers now have a little slot in the front. And what that slot does is actually a slot that allows access for you to slide slips of paper into that slot. And that slot feeds underneath the cash tray, the cash drawer insert. And so that's where you would stick, for example, all of your credit card slips. So if you don't want the cash drawer to open when you're doing a credit card transaction, then you can select on this, in which case then the drawer will not open when you're processing across to a Visa or a MasterCard or something like that. Allow retip. Depending on the credit card verification system that you're using and the credit service, if they allow for retipping, then you can select on this, in which case then if I accidentally put in $200 for my $20 tip and I need to fix that before we settle the charges at the end of the day, then if the credit service allows for that, then you can actually select on this, in which case then I can go back in and I can reapply that charge tip to that transaction to correct it. The next one down is force tender settlement. And related to that is show calculated tender amount. Now, force tender settlement, this all pertains to tender balancing. I kind of mentioned that in a couple of areas earlier on. And so in here, on a per method of payment basis, you can identify which ones you want to identify for tender settlement. Now, and I've got it set up right now for tender settlement based on cash out. So if I do a cash transaction and maybe some credit cards, and I have them all checked with force tender settlement, then when I do my employee cash out, then I will actually have a screen that will show up that will say, I need you to enter in what you've got for cash, Visa, MasterCard, for example. In which case, then I have to count all this stuff out. I put it into the system, and then it tells me if I'm over or short and whether I need to, recount it or I need to account for the missing $20 bill or something like that. And so if you do not have these checked, which by default they are not checked, then the system will just continue on with the cash out without requiring tender balancing. But if you do want to invoke that, you select on that, and this whole new screen will show up. And I'll explain more about that as we get further into the training. Now, the show calculated tender amount, this will determine whether it's going to be a blind tender balance or one that actually shows what you should have. For this situation, if I have a bunch of bartenders, for example, and they're counting out their cash, for example, as part of their cash out process, if I uncheck show calculated tender amount, then they will not know when they're counting that how much that they should have in there. And so when they submit to me their cash out report and their cash, then they'll say, this is what it is, and it shows here that I'm $20 over, so I'll have that done, or if they're short, then I need that $20 or something like that. Now, if you put in show calculated tender amount, then that is with the understanding they're going in and they're going to make sure that things balance up as best as they can. There's an upside to that, and that will make sure that more often than not that the balances coming in will match up with what the system shows. On the downside, sure enough, if an employee finds out, hey, I'm over by $15, then they will make it balance by pocketing the $15, and so now everything shows is exactly as it is, but the establishment said the $15 for whatever reason that happened. So it's up to the establishment to determine whether they want to show those amounts or not. Now, underneath this, we have this grayed out box. The reason why it's grayed out is because it's assumed with cash, but I'm going to select on another method of payment here so we can see this. Is bank deposit item non-EFT? Now, this all has to do with cash management. Cash management is basically the inventory of cash. Think of it that way. PixelPoint has the ability that you can actually monitor, for example, the contents of money going into a safe or several safes. If you've got cash drawer inserts and you have those cash drawer inserts all loaded up with their floats and ready to go, and they're in their own safes. You're also dealing with petty cash as well. You're also making bank deposits and sending money off to the bank. This is all part of the cash management system in PixelPoint. And in here, this is related to that in that we have is bank deposit item non-EFT. So this is an item, whatever this method of payment happens to be. If you check on it, that means that this method of payment will be included within your bank deposits. Now, it's also flagged here as non-EFT, electronic funds transfer. That's what EFT stands for. Now, Visa, for example, is a credit card, okay, and the funds are transferred electronically. Okay, electronic funds transfer. So in this case, you do not need to take your Visa slips to the bank because you've already got them deposited electronically, the same with any other form of credit. But if you take personal checks, for example, that would be something that you would include within a bank deposit. Or if you take food stamps, for example, or food vouchers, then those are things that are regarded kind of like as money, and there are new methods of payment that are set up within the system, and you do need to take them to the bank and deposit them that way. So if that is the case, you can identify them within here that those are bank deposit items, and the system will require that, if you've done any forms of transaction this way, then they should be accountable within your bank deposits as well, and they will be reflected within the cash management system. Also, we have ask for cash back as well. So within here, if you are set up with a credit card verification system that does allow for cash back processing as well, then when you do process through things such as on credit or within debit, then you can include within here ask for cash back, in which case then that extra little flag will be included in there, in which case then you can provide change to the customer based on their credit transaction. Coming down below that, we have card prefixes. Within card prefixes, when it comes to selecting on the method of payment, okay, so if I have a Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and if I swipe the card through the station on the finish screen, then the system will recognize what kind of card it is based on the prefix or the first several numbers within that card number. Now you'll see, for example, if the swipe card number begins with a 4, the system will recognize it as a Visa. You don't have to select Visa and then swipe the card, or swipe the card and then select Visa. It will just recognize it, and it'll save you a keystroke. Same goes here to MasterCard. Take a look at here. If it begins with a 51, 2, 3, 4, or 5, then the system will know it's a MasterCard. Okay, so that's basically what all these prefixes does, is that it will use card swipe recognition based on the prefix. Coming over to advanced, we have advanced settings on method of payment. The first thing here is accounting code and then tip accounting code. These are general ledger account numbers strictly for reporting purposes only, so you can put within here whatever the GL account numbers would be for those. Underneath that, we have custom DLL. So depending on where you are and what you're programming into the system, if there is a custom DLL, dynamic link library file, that needs to be applied in order to process this particular method of payment with whatever form of authorization is required, then you can apply that within there. Most cases, you won't have to do it. It's pretty rare that we come across anything like that, but we do have that capability in there. Cash change processing. Now, this is an interesting little thing here. This is for situations where we actually designed this originally for the UK, and there are other areas, parts of the world that are actually doing this as well, where you have government-issued vouchers, food vouchers. And within these, what you do is you take your food voucher, let's say for, all right, I'll speak in North American terms here. Let's say I've got a government food voucher for $15, and I can take this to a restaurant, and I can use this as money, okay? And in here, I order a meal. Now, the meal comes to $14.50. I got 50 cents left over. Now, the way these government vouchers typically work is that they do not provide for change. If they did, then some people will just go buy a pack of gum and then give me the change. And they don't want that. What they want them to do is use them, for meals and so on like that. And so, with that being said, what the system will do is if I do actually present a $15 government voucher and it comes to $14.50, rather than provide change, it says here the system displays and prints $0 change and the house keeps the change, being the 50 cents. Okay, so that's the way it works. If it goes over the $15, then you pay whatever is above and beyond that. But if it's less than the $15, you're only going to get, the $14.50 worth, and that's it. So that's what all this pertains to here, is just how to handle the processing of change for things of that nature. Okay, next one down here is print customer authorization slip with transaction receipt. Okay, it's pretty self-explanatory here. So the customer authorization slip is the credit card authorization slip, and print that at the same time as the transaction receipt. So basically, rather than have two separate print jobs going at the same time, you're actually having the receipt print off with the credit card slips at the same time. It just kind of saves that. It is just double hit process. So this way, if they're going to pay for it on MasterCard, then here's your 2 charge slips, and along with this, we've auto-printed the receipt as well, all at the same time. Print customer authorization slip with the transaction receipt. So if you, sorry, I messed up on myself here. So that's what that does. But also within this as well, also when receipt is reprinted as well. Now, if, for example, when I'm doing printing of these things, if I do a reprint of any kind of receipt, it will actually show up with on there reprint. Okay, this is a security feature for the system, and so that will identify that this is, it's already been printed once. I'm printing it again. Now, if there was a mess up with the paper, it got jammed, or the printer had a problem, or whatever the case, if you have to reprint the receipt, then it will also reprint the slips as well. Now, also on this as well, we have minimum value and maximum value on this as well. So on here, what you can do is on a per method of payment basis, not so much for cash, of course, but for other things, you can actually set in allowable minimum and maximum values that can be applied within the check as well when applying this method of payment. And if it's too small, then it will not accept that. So for example, I buy a pack of gum, it's 50 cents, here's my Visa, then you may say, well, no, we're not going to do that because that's silly, and you got to purchase something a little bit more. The charge the surcharge on that will be more than what the amount of the thing is anyway. So you can actually set up minimums and maximums on this as well. Coming over to the right-hand side, we have always print on receipt. All right, now what this means is that this method of payment will always print on the check when you print it off. Situations you would use this is where you commonly use foreign methods of payment. Okay, let me just kind of close on that. I'll go to foreign currency. There, foreign currency. This would be a typical example of this, where if I have, let's say, I'm an American restaurant, but I accept Canadian currency, or vice versa. Then what you can do is within this foreign currency of, let's say, Canadian or American, whatever happens to be, I have always print on receipt. So when it prints off, it'll show you, here's the contents of your check, here's everything that you ordered, here's how much you owe. That O is with the assumption of being base currency. But if we also accept, let's say, Canadian currency or American currency, then that method of payment, if you have that checked for that, will also show up on the check, and whatever the exchange rate value is for that. So this way, if you can accept one method of payment or another, they'll both show up on the check all the time. Do not ask for swipe. This is for situations where you may be working with handhelds, for example. And on the handheld, I don't have a swipe card on it. I need to put in a manual entry number. So if that is the case, I can actually override the system where it asks on this particular method of payment, where it's requiring a swipe. I can check on this, in which case then I would manually punch that in using the little tiny touch screen because you're working on a PDA. Do not ask for expiry date. On this as well, there may be situations where you want to override this, or depending on if you're using custom authorization for the system, if you want to override either of these pertaining to the swipe and the expiry date on a credit card, then you can actually check on this and it will actually override that. Print credit card number format. Now when it comes to printing out the formats for that, if you are using a system called ValueLink, this is one of our forms of credit card authorization system, working with the First Data Credit Service. It's a very popular one. Then you can actually dictate which format you want to use. There's the conventional one is where it only shows the last 4 digits, but it doesn't show everything before that for the credit card number. But the masking, you can actually reverse that within the First Data system, in which case then it will mask out the last 4, but it will show you everything before that. So you can go one way or the other in that particular circumstance. Payment denominations. This all has to do with the cash management system, as I had mentioned earlier on. And within here, you can actually program in, here I'm going to jump up to cash for a moment here, cash, payment denominations. In here, you can actually program in the individual denominations that you accept within the establishment. So this way, when you're going through and counting your tender balance, for example, not only will you say, I've got $500.23 in cash in my till, but you can also say I've got this many 50s, this many 20s, this many 10s, 5s, 1s, and so on like that. And you can program in all of these within this tab here. And this will work in conjunction with the cash management system to make sure that all of the specific denominations are accounted for in here, so you can make sure you've got enough 20s and 50s and 10s and 5s, enough change within the establishment to make further change and so on. Okay, I could go into a little more about that, but that's pretty self-explanatory. I think for what we've got today, that pretty well covers it. So we've got just a few minutes right now. My apologies for going a little bit over time, but I did want to kind of finish all that off.